Hello everyone, it's Saoirse, and I'm a cowboy today because we're going to talk about a Western, and I'm so excited about it. I've been meaning to get to this for a while because this is without a doubt one of the best books I've ever read in my whole life. It's called In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. Now, I found this book at Malaprop's bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina this summer, and it has no summary on the back, and usually I wouldn't pick that up, and I wonder why. Publishers tell me, why do you do this? Why do you sometimes put no summary whatsoever? Because how are we supposed to know what it's about? But it worked out because this was a staff pick, and the staff member who picked it happened to be sitting right behind me while I picked it up off the shelf, and he was like, you should read that. You really need to read that. It's great. And kind of gave me a couple sentences about what it was about. I think he said Swedish boy and 1800s, and that's pretty much all I need. And it's a Western in the sense that it takes place in the American West during the gold rush. So it's this young Swedish boy who is sent to New York City with his brother, and he accidentally gets on the wrong boat and doesn't end up in New York City. He ends up in San Francisco, and he spends his entire life in the American West during the gold rush era trying to get to New York to find his brother. And he is mostly alone for the entire book. It says on the back here, a gorgeously written novel that charts one man's growth from boyhood to mythic status as he journeys between continents and the extremes of the human condition. And this suspenseful novel is a potent depiction of loneliness, a memorable immigration narrative, and a canny reinvention of the old school Western. So it's very me to relate to a troubled young man in the 1800s. That's a me thing. So I just knew that I was gonna like it, but I'd never read this author before, didn't know what the writing style would be like. My God, the prose in this book is enough to keep me reading even if there had been no story, because I'm more about prose than story anyway, style over story. So it was just absolutely gripping the way that it was written, and you would think, oh, a guy walking by himself for decades, that's not going to be that exciting. But it was just gorgeous and lyrical and poetic, and I planned it perfectly where the final, 50, 60 pages of the book I finished on a plane to Boston, and I thought, how much do I think I can read on a, 2.5, 3 hour flight? And it was, to the minute. We were landing, I finished the book in time to watch the descent into Boston. It was the first time that I'd really sat on a plane and read the entire flight and didn't get distracted, didn't get, I'm very afraid of flying, so I wasn't, freaking out about the fact that we're up in the air. I was just in this book, completely absorbed, in awe, just with this character for the entire journey. And I think that is kind of the best recommendation that I can give, that it distracted me on a flight. And I also have a very short attention span, and it's hard for me to concentrate on reading for long periods. So to read for that length of time, in an uncomfortable position, in a place where I'm in terror, it says a lot about the power of this book. So let's get into the million things that I want to read from it. It's just, it's so good. I wish I could just make everybody read it, but you can't do that. Okay, yeah, we're just gonna dig in. This is just a great description. Just wanted to give you an example of the writing style. I just kind of felt like I was in this dreamlike state for most of it. It says, the doors and windows of the carriage remained shut. The heavy black velvet curtains swelled and collapsed slowly, regularly, as if the coach were breathing. And can't you just see that? You're seeing this old-timey coach, and the curtains are just swelling out of the windows like that, and it looks like it's breathing. I thought that was a gorgeous description. Oh crap, I should have looked up exactly how to pronounce the character's name, but so his name is Hakan, and there is the little accent that looks like a circle on top of the first A, and I've always understood that to be like an o sound in Swedish. Correct me if I'm wrong, I really should have looked this up, but people always think he's saying that his name is Hawk, and when he says it, they're like, Hawk can what? But I think it's Hawken, something like that. So if I call him Hawken and that's not right, so sorry. It felt good to be in bed, hurting alone, and it felt good to slide into the deepest sadness he had experienced since losing Linus. His grief was indistinguishable from his ease. Both had the same texture and temperature. Comfort and gloom, he realized, came from the combination of cold water and the scent of pine resin. He had not felt that tingling since his ice baths in the lake back in Sweden. And that smell, Håkan and Linus, following their father's lead, would crack a hole open on a safe spot. The ice had to be thin enough for the axe, but thick enough to bear them, etc., etc. I liked this comparison of grief and ease. This book does such a great job of blurring the lines between human emotions, and when you spend so much time alone and also in fight or flight, I mean, he's in survival mode for the entire book, which is his entire life pretty much. You don't have anybody to like bounce these things off of. You're just feeling all of this yourself, and when nobody around you speaks your language, because he comes to America not speaking English, nobody speaks Swedish, and he's just stuck in his own thoughts. And when it's like that, you can't discuss your grief, you can't discuss different sensations, and it all kind of blends together, and the only way to distinguish, oh, I'm feeling grief now, or I'm feeling this now, is these like almost physical sensations that come along with those emotions. It's just really smart writing. Okay, time. Time is a huge theme in this book, and it makes me think of that song Time from Interstellar. Shout out. So, one of the brilliant things this author does is cover decades worth of time in a way that kind of all feels like the same moment, but also makes you feel completely exhausted because this has been going on so long and this man is so tired. Let's see. On occasion, with no regularity, he was left alone, and he eventually understood that he would not be taken to the woman's room if dawn came before his guard. These were the only events that vaguely organized his existence, which took place in an elastic present that kept on stretching without the slightest distortion and without ever promising to snap. Brilliant. An elastic present. He has no way to mark time, and he has to just look at it as this is when they're taking me from my room, this is when this is happening, and these are the only things that break up the day. And he knows when it's day and when it's night, and that's pretty much it. And we'll get into some other stuff about time. Trust me, there's a lot. Summer came to an end. The ragged blankets they gave him were insufficient, but he was used to being cold. The landscape remained impervious to the freezing temperatures. Nothing changed. Looking through the window, Håkan imagined that it was cold only in his room, and that if he were to stick his hand out, he would find it to be blazing hot, just like the day he arrived. So it's like his life is passing by and seasons are changing, and it's such a weird environment for him to be in because he's from Sweden where there would be snow in the winter. And he's looking out and the landscape just looks exactly the same throughout the seasons, but it gets colder. But it sounds like it's not snowing. So there's nothing visually to tell him that anything's changed. And he's pretty much trapped in his room this entire time since he's been imprisoned. The warm weather returned, and Håkan felt that he had gone back in time 1 year. That was such a cool line. Like, he has been in this place long enough for the seasons to cycle all the way through, and we're back to the warm weather, and it just feels like he's gone back in time a year because nothing else has changed and the weather's the same again. So like, who's to say this isn't just last year now? Oh, the elements are described so brilliantly in this book. When he finally escapes from this place, he's out in this sandstorm. Let's see. Soon night itself was obliterated by the whirlpool of sand. The gale's force, together with the stinging dust it carried, made up a new element, something that, despite its roughness and dryness, was closer to water than earth and air. Håkan had to turn around to breathe. He kept on running, feeling safely cloaked by the storm, which plugged his ears with a roar. His face was shut up like a fist. Even if the pelleted wind had allowed it, there was no point in keeping his eyes open in that double darkness. He took a tumble at almost every other step, but welcomed each fall for the respite lying flat on the ground gave him from the harsh stream. Nevertheless, he would quickly get back on his feet and resume his blind race, panting through tight lips. Morning never broke. The blackness just paled. Whoa. The double darkness. The darkness of night and the sandstorm. There's just nothing to be seen at that point. I thought that was so well written. And then morning never broke, the blackness just paled. Like this is one long day going on forever. And I related to that in so many ways. There's so much of this book that, like, I'm glad I read it now at this point in my life after having come back from that hike in California that I did, where the elements were very much a big part of it. It was constant exposure, you know, nowhere to hide from the sun, which was so intense, and it was so dry. And so it's kind of perfect that I had that experience right before reading this book, because without that context, I don't think I would have fully grasped, although the descriptions are wonderful, I wouldn't have fully grasped what it was like for this character to be out there, constantly exposed to everything. But yeah, this idea of one long day going on forever, that is how I felt when I was in the Sierra Nevada, because I had altitude insomnia and I didn't sleep for like 6 days. And that kind of felt like I am living the same day for this whole week. This week has been one day. There is nothing to mark it, no period of rest to say, like, I can delineate this is yesterday and this is today. And then this idea of the blackness just paling, and there's never really, like, the dawn never really breaks. That reminded me a lot of when I lived in Scotland, and in the winter, it's so far north that it gets dark at like 4 p.m. and the sun doesn't rise till like 9 a.m. and it doesn't really rise. Like, there were so many weeks where it just felt like the sun didn't even make a real attempt to get up there and shine. It was just kind of a slightly dim evening twilight all the time. And then same in the summer, when the sun wouldn't set till like midnight and then it came back up at 3 a.m. It was just, it never really went down. It was just always kind of twilight. So yes, I really appreciated these descriptions. Walking was a constant miracle. The most difficult moment of each step was to put his foot down. He would look at his shoe, amazed to see it in mid-air, wondering how it got there, and how it would ever manage to land. Then, on his next step, he would stare at his other foot with the same bewilderment, and each time his surprise was fresh, as if he were noticing his suspended foot for the first time. His gait became an odd balancing act as he raised each foot increasingly higher and left it hanging for a short while, his arms slightly outstretched for balance, like a stiff monster. The sameness of the landscape only added to his derangement. He came in and out of consciousness and found himself in mid-stride, marching through a country identical to the one he had seen before his spell. It was impossible to know how much time had elapsed, or how far he had traveled. Sometimes he thought he was walking in place. Oh. Genius. I wonder what this author's experience is. With, by the way, oh, you can't see it. This is my cup from Alcatraz. I'm gonna spill it all over the book. I got this from Alcatraz. It's like a recreation of the cups they had in the prison. Anyway, I wonder what this author's experience is with long distance walking and being out in the elements, because it's like you could not have written this without understanding a bit of what this is like. And I can understand in a small way this whole section, because no, I have not been traversing the American West for decades during the gold rush trying to get to New York. But just being a long distance hiker, this idea of like walking miles and miles every day, like the most I've walked in a day is over 26 miles. You're just amazed when your foot raises up and then goes back down again, and it is just mechanical, like you're not even making it happen anymore. And you're surprised that it keeps going. And that was so visceral, that description. And then this idea of walking in place, when nothing changes, like that's kind of how I felt in the Sierra, because it was so stark and barren and dry, and and you're just feeling like nothing's really changing as you're going. Yeah, it's not as like a varied landscape as I think the Appalachian Trail is, which is where I'm more used to hiking. Okay, more time. Okay, so he meets this scientist who's trying to kind of prove the origin of man and like the origin of life itself. God did not create man. He created something that became man. If we could only go back in time far enough, millions of ages, our ancestors would start to lose their human features. Little by little, they would look less like men and more like beasts. And if we went all the way back to the dawn of days, we would discover that the creature that fathered us all did not even resemble any animal we had ever seen. We would find Adam, our forefather's forefather, to be a passive, translucent gelatin, a blob of marrow bobbing in the otherwise barren ocean. I think this is another thing he put in there to talk about this theme of time. And it would be so interesting to have a conversation with this author and be like, why did you put this, and this in there? But I sense that this meeting of this scientist and this, a lot of getting into the origin of life has to do with this theme of the passage of time, and how things transform over time. The way that we can see Håkan is transforming over time and kind of becoming, as it says on the back, this mythic character, because people start to hear about what he's done. And he is, I forgot to mention, like a very, very massive person. As he grows up, he just becomes huge, and like nobody has seen somebody that tall and big, and so he cannot hide anywhere. It's part of why he isolates himself for all these years, because he's really easily spotted, and he could be imprisoned for what people see as his crimes, which he has such a guilty conscience about what he's done, because he has to kill these people who attack the caravan that he's with. And it's like, it was really self-defense, but that's not how the story spreads. And so he's just forced to keep walking and walking, and eventually turn around and give up on going to New York, because he can't get there, because everybody has heard about him and can recognize him. Where the heck am I? Oops. Okay. So I wrote, wow, here, let's see. Moving through the throbbing desert was like sinking into the state of trance immediately preceding sleep, where consciousness summons up all its remaining strength only to register the moment of its own dissolution. All that could be heard was the thin earth, rock pulverized through the seasons, bones milled by the elements, ashes scattered like a whisper over the plains, being further ground under the hooves. Soon this sound became part of the silence. Hawken often cleared his throat to make sure he had not gone deaf. Above the hard shallowness of the desert, the unkind skies, and the minuscule sun, a dense, sharp dot. Okay, that line where consciousness summons up all its remaining strength only to register the moment of its own dissolution, that gave me goosebumps. I remember having to read this paragraph a couple times to get it, because sometimes when I'm reading, I'm just like, la-di-da, I'm not really like absorbing, and you can't do that with a book like this, where there is much more substance under the surface. It's not just description of what's happening. It's like how it feels. Like we're always in writing trying to get across some truth about the experience of how something feels, how it feels to live through something, not just that you did live through it and this is what happened and here are the details. Consciousness summoning up all its remaining strength only to register the moment of its own dissolution. That's what moving through the desert feels like. I just want to like sit and think about that for a while. I hope you are as impressed as me. Oh, I wrote Interstellar here. Why did I write that? Let's find out. Every day, Hawken was visited by the elation he had experienced riding his own horse, a feeling that had been intense enough, his physical frame had barely been able to contain it, to ripple through time and lap against the present. And I really liked that line, lap against the present, because it made me think of The Great Gatsby and how we are, like, what is it, boats on the current borne back ceaselessly into the past, something like that. And it made me think of Interstellar, how you find out that like love is the only thing that can transcend space and time and like be felt through the ripples of time. So he's like this feeling of riding a horse and having his own horse, it was so incredibly powerful, that emotion, that it hits him sometimes in the present and it feels just the same again as if it was happening now. Makes you think. It's like how sometimes something happens to us and we are immediately and without any decision to do it, we are just transported back to another phase of our life. You know, suddenly we're 7 years old on the playground because we heard something or smelled something or somebody said something that just triggered a memory. Yeah, it's I don't know, this book is just so great at describing the power and weakness of time, I think. Because like you said, it's this elastic present that just goes on forever, but it can bring you like a little gift from the past. I don't know, it's so interesting. Okay. Nobody spoke. There was a heightened awareness of the present. As he ate his food, Hawken felt that he was saying goodbye to something. So this is right before there's this huge fight where he ends up killing those people. And this is where we can mark a shift. There is a shift into the next era of his life. So here's another really great description of time passing. Often the three of them, burro, horse, rider, would simply stand in the middle of the plains. Aside from the occasional sigh or the half-hearted attempt at swatting away an insect, they all stood still, staring into the void. Brown flats, blue wall. From his animals with their serenely sad, bulge-eyed gaze, Hawken seemed to have learned to gape into space. To this absent expression he added a drooping jaw. They merely stood, completely absorbed by nothing. Time dissolved into the sky. There was little difference between landscape and spectators, insensible things that existed in one another. Suddenly, Hawken would come out of his long stupor, consult his compass, and set out again, only to lapse into empty thoughts a moment later, and once again relinquish his command to the bay. He barely ate. Charqui, a biscuit. His fires at night were small. Sleep seldom came to him. He lost all count of time and had no clear idea of where he was. Still, he believed that with luck and an extra effort, he could reach New York in a matter of weeks. And yet he felt no desire to rush on. His thoughts weakened until they were just lethargic spasms in the thick fog that clouded his consciousness. Gradually, his reason quieted down, became a murmur, and finally ceased. Oh, I want to cry. His thoughts weakened until they were just lethargic spasms in the thick fog that clouded his consciousness. You get this sense of more than boredom. It's the most intense that boredom can possibly be, to the point where your brain is almost atrophying because you're not using it. His life is so simple and monotonous and repetitive. It's just not what humans have evolved to do. Unfortunately, we are at the stage of evolution where we are not satisfied by just foraging and finding shelter. We need to be mentally stimulated in so many ways, and you can see just the complete deterioration of his mind here. And I mean, I get like this when I'm alone on hikes for too long, and that was like one reason why I, aside from the insomnia, couldn't finish the hike on the John Muir Trail, because I just wasn't meeting anyone. I was completely alone, and that can just eat at you when your existence is monotonous like this, and you're not having any conversation. So yeah, man, I was just like, I relate to this character so much. He feared sunset and often spent the entire day worrying about night. The lack of firewood and the violence of some of the gusts sometimes made it impossible to build a fire. I love this fear of sunset. I had the opposite thing where I feared sunrise on this hike, because I knew that the sunrise meant the sun's gonna be up there, baking everything, drying everything out, just annihilating me. And it's like you get this, you turn into this animal. You have this animal fear when you're in the wild, and you start to you're living completely in the present. And that was another great thing that he gets across in this book, is just living 100% in this moment. There is nothing else, because you are an animal and you cannot think about yesterday or tomorrow. You're just surviving. And so when you're on these trips in the wild, everything becomes very, like, you have tunnel vision. It's very simple. You have to get from this point to this point, and you have to make sure that you have food and water and somewhere to sleep. So I liked this clear transformation of him from a boy with a goal to find his brother into this creature, basically, who has to contend with the elements. The source, okay, so he thinks that he's been like poisoned by something. He somehow knew that his sickness had not been caused by something he had eaten. The source of his malady was outside him. It was the plains. It was his constant motion through the void. Perhaps the lack of proper food and rest exacerbated it, but the undulated expanse itself had become sickening. Just looking at the plains made the lump denser, and it got harder and more asphyxiating as soon as he started to move across the steppe. The brown, the knolls, the murmur, the glare, the dust, the hooves, the horizon, the grass, the hands, the sky, the wind, the thoughts, the glare, the hooves, the dust, the knolls, the hands, the horizon, the brown, the murmur, the sky, the wind, the grass, made him queasy. Sometimes he tried to make himself throw up, but only felt the veins in his head bulge and threatened to burst as he retched. Minor events interrupted the nauseous monotony. Buffalo, a rainbow, but after their dispersion, the illness only returned with a renewed force. Ugh, that paragraph. This is when the monotony threatens to kill him. Like, you can really feel that you could die of boredom, and it's just, boredom is such a, it's just a chill word. Like, it's not, it doesn't represent this feeling of we need a better word for it. Not malaise, not apathy. It's just when your life has become so predictable, it is actually making you sick. And this was such a gorgeous description, because you can totally see the plains and how if you're walking across them, just featureless, unchanging, boring plains for weeks and months and years, and nothing is happening. How do you survive that? And you only survive it because you have the animal instinct to survive, which is what happens with him. And I think we have a passage about that later. West again. The grass, the horizon, the tyranny of the elements. Undefined visions wafting through his brain, seldom amounting to thoughts, relinquishing command to his horse, barely eating, clearing his throat to remind himself of himself, sunburned, smelling occasionally his own body, a vague and vacant interest in flowers and insects. Enough rain, no tracks, no threats, sometimes a fire leaping under his fingers, the burro and the horse in their perpetual present, his hands doing things, riding on, breathing somehow, benumbed yet never finding rest from a thickening sense of desolation, sponged up by the starry sky each night. Oh, God, it's like every freaking paragraph is brilliant. That might be one of my favorite ones. Like, he's numb, but he's still not able to get away from the sense of desolation. It's like, you would hope being this numb and at this point probably dissociated would offer some sort of solace, and it doesn't. He feels even more desolate, and then sponged up by the starry sky each night. Like, here comes the night sky to just, like, take you into oblivion. Like, it's just this unchanging vastness. The tyranny of the elements, and the elements do feel evil and malevolent. Yeah, and I understand that excitement too of like, oh, there's buffalo, there's a rainbow. It's just something, anything different than what's been going on, please. What the heck does that say? He was sick of the sun and would often lie on his stomach, drowsy and almost feverish from the stale air under the low-hanging skins and canvases to avoid its light. Still it would pierce through his refuge and bore into his skull, igniting all the past suns that had hunted down and degraded him and everyone else he had met throughout his journey. And then he goes on to describe all the sun in different places that he's been on this journey. And it's so relatable. It's so freaking relatable, because I just came to absolutely detest the sun, to fear it, to just the second there was like a glow of sun, that creeping fear. Knowing that there's nothing you can do. That as soon as that thing is above the horizon, it's over. Like, you're gonna have the breath sucked out of you. And even with, I had an umbrella. Even with an umbrella and a hat and sunglasses and long sleeves, it doesn't matter. And the way he's like he's lying on his stomach, feverish, trying to hide from the sun. there were times that I would just set up my tent super early because I couldn't take it anymore, and then I couldn't even be in the tent, couldn't get in the tent because it was too hot. And this dry heat, I mean, to get in the tent would be like getting into an oven. And even though it wasn't temperature-wise that hot, it's just the intensity of the sun. So I think that's something that I didn't understand as much before I had that experience. I grew up in Florida, and I understand very strong heat and like a jungly heat where it's very wet and humid. But this dry heat where you're 11,000 feet in the air and the sun is like right here, you're so close to it. It's an intensity that doesn't even need to have heat to be painful and to really take your breath away. Oh, what a perfect little transition there, because the next thing I wrote was breath. With a jolt, he realized that he had forgotten to breathe. He gasped for air, curled up, and tried to concentrate on the fire, but his body would not breathe. It was only through a colossal exercise of will that he could inhale. His lungs were inert alien things, completely external devices, bellows he had to pump by hand. He feared he would die if he failed to actively produce the next inhalation. 100%. That's exactly how it feels. And I mean for different reasons, but for me, being at a high elevation, that's not something that I was ever used to. And the lack of oxygen, once you get over 7,000 feet, is just staggering. And I felt, even when I came back home, it took over a week to feel like I could even fully inflate my lungs. Like my lungs literally had stopped working to that extent. Like they weren't used to having to fully inflate anymore because there was no point, there was no air out there. So they would just get to a certain point and just crap out. And that is a terrifying feeling. And it's actually what causes altitude insomnia, because you can't get a stable breathing pattern going while you're trying to fall asleep, so you keep waking back up. You get hypoxia, and it just never ends. So brilliant. Okay, this point, I love this. We have a point on his existential map, and this is something that I loved so much learning about in college. I took this class called something about pop culture, and we ended up studying basically heroes, villains, and anti-heroes, and watching stuff like Dexter and Batman. And we talked about the existential map. If you look at your life, you'll see these points where you had to choose to either adapt or die, basically. So something happens, like Batman loses his parents, and he makes a choice. He can either just give up, or he's going to transform, he's going to adapt to it, become something else in order to fit this new reality. So he becomes a vigilante. So, okay, let's look at this. For months he had led a crawling existence in those bushes, hoping that by staying there, without actually deciding anything, he would return through a motionless path to the peace of an inanimate state. Yet when the gift of death had been presented to him, he had used every single one of his poisoned muscles to push it away. Remaining in his degraded condition after this realization was impossible. I love that. I love that. You realize only if you're faced with a situation like this where it's kind of life or death, you can no longer stay in that state of just apathy and not moving. And I know this all too well, the feeling of, if I just don't move, I don't have to make any decisions, nothing can hurt me, I'll just stay in this same position forever. But then if you have something happen on your existential map, like where he was poisoned by something and almost died, he found in himself, he still has this animal instinct to survive anyway, And after that, after living through that, it was impossible to go back to this dejected lump on the ground that he had been, because he was really just giving up, basically. And yeah, not to get too into it, but I've been there before, where it's like, it's either the end or you change something and you get yourself some help. So love that clear little point on the existential map. Okay, exhaustion plays such a part in this book. This part where he meets, this is so freaking sad, when he meets someone who like really becomes an ally to him. And I'm not quite sure how to say his name. It's A-S-A. I've been saying Asa in my brain. I'm tired, Hawkins said in a soft moan, his face disfigured behind the tears. Asa held him tighter. I'm tired. Hawkins rested his hand on Asa's shoulder, sobbing. So tired. Oh my god. Like, it's the first time that he really has another person who, like, we talk about being touch-starved. Oh my god, this man, this boy who's grown into a man, like, he's had nobody physically touch him in years. He's just, imagine what that does to your psyche. And finally he has this person that he can lean on and cry on and just say, oh my god, I'm so tired. I have been walking for years. I'm exhausted, and not just physically, but you see what the planes are doing to his mind, how it's just destroying him mentally, and how he must know that he's never going to find his brother. And then having to also like hide from people and be afraid of everyone because of this fact that everyone knows who he is and what he's done. Oh god, I just felt the exhaustion there. Like it was like all of this was pent up inside him, this exhaustion, and he wasn't able to admit to it, or he would fall apart. And so he can't fall apart because he's alone in the desert, pretty much. But then he finds an ally, and he can just, it's like this exhale where he's letting go of all of this stuff that he's kept inside, and he's able to say, I am so tired. And I think that's such an important moment. Okay. The forest died out, and only some prickly gray things sprouted every now and then. Birds no longer flew in flocks, only a bird here, and then later maybe a bird there. The air felt tense, as if the entire sky had inhaled and pulled back while holding its breath. And the sun, always the sun, small in the sky, immense on the ground. Oh, I mean, I just like tabbed everything that had to do with sun and air, because that is like all I've been writing about lately. I've spent almost all of NaNoWriMo so far. So like 3 weeks of November writing this essay about the JMT, and the overarching elements are, sun and lack of oxygen, and because of that, lack of sleep. So we have all of those elements in here. Like we have loneliness, we have sun, we have lack of air, and we have exhaustion. And that's all in here. And so like no wonder I really bonded with this character. There were simply no goals or destinations anymore, not even the desire to die that he had experienced after the most crushing tragedies in his life. He was just something that kept going, not because it wanted to, but because that was the way it had been built. To keep going with the bare minimum was the line of least resistance. It was natural and therefore involuntary. Anything else would have required a decision. And the last decision he had ever made had been to dig his burrow. If he kept going at it endlessly, it was simply because he could not muster up the strength to decide to stop. Oh my god. Brilliant, brilliant description of just this lack of decision. He, like I just said before, making a decision is doing something. Whereas, like, yes, he's doing something by continuing to burrow, but that doesn't feel like doing something. That is a continuation of the same thing. It is not going, wait, stop, I want to change tracks and do something else. That feels completely impossible when you're in this state of mind. And he just wants nothing anymore. You know, he's not trying to get anywhere. He's not even trying to die. He is just an animal, and at this point, kind of a robot that just keeps going. Because that's the instinct that we have built into us. For the most part, he avoided leaving the burrow. After having spent most of his life outdoors, walking, he liked being inside. It was not that he feared vast expanses. Rather, he felt about open space the way he did about rain, something he would prefer to get out of. Ugh. Being inside. Being inside is such a wild concept when you're outside. You know, when I've spent days and days at a time in the wild, I think maybe the longest that I've been outside with absolutely no civilization is like 8 days, probably the 100-mile wilderness in Maine. Because at most other sections of the AT, you're gonna come to a town or come to a road where you can get to a town and resupply and all that. But there is that stretch of 100 miles where there's nothing, and the concept of being inside just becomes so foreign to you. Even being in a bathroom, like sitting on a toilet, lying on a bed, everything just, it sounds like a fairy tale. It's just made up. When you get to do it, it's like for the first time. Like you've never been in a bed before. So just, it was a really well-crafted description of that. You know, he's been outside forever. So he makes this burrow and he's like, I'm going inside. Catch you later. Whenever Hawken coughed or said a word out loud, his own voice sounded monstrous, like that of an ungainly giant, an invader in his own home. It was a relief that the clay walls sucked in these awkward growls immediately without leaving a trace. In this subterranean quiet, his movements became more deliberate and softer. Everything took more time, and therefore there was a full awareness of each action as it was being performed, as if to expand the present to which he was confined. The tin cup was not merely put on the table, but placed there with the utmost care, so that when the tin and the wood touched, the moment was prolonged enough to give a slightly miraculous feel and create the impression of a gentle yet momentous meeting of alien worlds. He was reluctant to split firewood indoors, feeling there was something irreverent and even tasteless in the loud snaps. When he made a stew or glue, he was careful to stir the liquid without clanging against the pot's walls. Without being fully aware of it at first, he often found himself scratching his beard just because he enjoyed the sound. Oh my god. This writer is so good. When you read hundreds of books like me, you kind of feel like you've read all the tropes, you've read all the different ways to describe something. Like, okay, we're doing that again. I've never heard somebody do this. To talk about taking the cup, and it's not just put on the table, it's placed there with care, so that moment when it touches the wood is prolonged. It makes this meeting of alien worlds. It's like to put that much thought into something because it's all you've got. You are trapped in this present moment, so you've got to do something with it. I adored that description. He was reconciled with the idea of dying, but he did not want to share that singular final experience with these brutes. So after all this, he's really earned the right, and I think we don't have to earn it. It's already our right, but maybe he thinks this, that he wants to die privately. He doesn't want to share it with these people. Whether they mean him ill or not, even if they weren't the things that were probably going to kill him, he wouldn't want them to be around anyway if he was going to die. And yeah, he definitely doesn't want them to be the ones to kill him because it's just so meaningless after everything he's been through for it to end with these people who stumble upon his burrow. But he does not die there. Sometimes he thought that brief period, which compared to the long and eventful years that had followed it, was so short that he had yielded to the illusion of believing that he could remember every single day spent at the farm since he was old enough to be aware of his surroundings. It was like a pinhole in the unending expanse, and everything, the plains, the mountains, the canyons, the salt flats, the forests, had drained down through it. Immense as they were, those territories had never held him or embraced him, not even when he dug into the ground and found shelter in the earth's bosom. Anyone he met, including children, had in his eyes more right to be in that land than he did. Nothing was his, nothing claimed him. He had gone into the wilderness with the intention of coming out on the other end. That he had stopped trying did not mean that this was now his place. And that part's so sad, because even after everything he's been through, he still doesn't belong to this place. To feel foreign in your own life for the entire expanse of your life, it sounds like such torture. Like he's just never found his place, and even giving up and saying, all right, I'm just gonna stay here, still doesn't make it his place. Ever since those 5 men had come to the burrow, Hawken had been surprised to discover that almost everybody out west was young. Perhaps this had always been the case, and he had failed to notice it when he was young himself, but now he seldom saw anyone his age. It's, like, throughout the entire book, I was still hoping he's gonna find his brother, and, like, he's still gonna be young when he does it, even though, the book starts out with him as an older man telling this story to people on a ship that he's working on. So the whole time I'm like, why is he out there in the West still? Like when he's telling the point where he's telling the story from, he's in the West. Why is he out there? Like, please tell me he went to New York, found his brother, and like then they both got jobs out west. Like, is that what happens? Please, but no, he never got out of the West. Mail time. So I thought that was really interesting, that he's been alone for so long and like not looking at a reflection of himself or anything. Just kind of imagine that, like feeling you're aging rather than ever getting any visual clues to it. And then you show up amongst tons of people, which hasn't happened in years, and all the people are young. That must be so disorienting, that to realize like, oh, everybody out here is like just starting out. I've been through this entire life journey, and everyone is still coming out here to the West to like start their new life. And it's something that I'd never really thought about, and it makes sense. The people who did go out, like the pioneers who went to try and get some gold in the West, they would have been, young, vital people who had the strength in them to do that. Nothing left behind in the wilderness could ever be retrieved. Every encounter was final. Nobody came back from beyond the horizon. It was impossible to return to anything or anyone. Whatever was out of sight was forever lost. What was I going to say? Just this idea of being swallowed up by land and time. It's the only thing he knows. Every time he's met somebody, that's been it. He hasn't seen them again. And even like it goes back to the original loss of losing his brother and never seeing him again. Whatever was out of sight was forever lost. What a sad lesson to learn. Okay, this is when I was crying. And I can't pronounce any of this, but he meets this captain guy who's like the first nice person since that one friend that he had. And the guy asks, "Where are you from?" And he says, "Sweden." Ha! The captain, excited, tapped himself on the forehead and walked back to Håkan. And then he says this whole paragraph in Swedish. And, I know enough to recognize that that's Swedish. And, like, as soon as I saw the letters and the accents, and I just started crying because, oh my god, all these decades that he has not had anybody to speak his language. And he has learned some English and managed to get by when he has had to interact with people. But nobody has just known his language. And he was so young when he left Sweden. And we have a hard enough time communicating with each other in the first place, even when we are literally speaking the same language to each other. Imagine how isolating and terrifying and suffocating it is to not hear your language at all and to not be able to speak the language of the locals for years. So that, it was just such an earned moment after all that he's been through. I was so happy to see that. But then I was sad on the very next page. It says he did not feel more confident or safer speaking in his native tongue. He discovered now that his shyness, his vacillation, his preference for silence had nothing to do with language. He was the same in Swedish. This quiet, hesitant being was simply who he was or had become. But still, I think it helped. It helped to be able to talk to someone. I liked this bit where the captain is giving Håkan wine, and he says, or this is just a description of wine. The black liquid dawned into light crimson toward the surface. Håkan took a small sip. It made his tongue dry and harsh like a cat's. It tasted of unknown fruit, salt, wood, and warmth. Just what a way to describe wine. It makes your tongue dry and harsh like a cat's. Ooh, that makes me want to drink a glass of wine. What the heck does that say? Okay, this is just the end, the last paragraph here. He's talking to, after telling this whole story, like we have the beginning, this is the framing device where he's telling the story to everybody on the ship, then we have the whole story, and now we're back in the present where he's starting to walk away after telling the story. And this boy is looking at him like, "What are you doing?" He says, "Now I may be able to walk over the sea, otherwise next winter, because now the water's frozen so he can walk on it. Then a straight line west, to Sweden." Perplexed, the boy turned to the solitary expanse. He seemed disoriented by the horizontal vastness, indefinite and bare, like another sky under the sky. When he looked back, Håkan was already straddling the ice-lacquered railing. The boy approached him, wanting to say something. Without pausing or looking back, Håkan started his descent. A moment later, the boy, leaning over the deck, saw the colossal man pick up his bundle and stare at the icy extension ahead. Spindrift smudged the horizon. Although the wind had not reached him yet, Håkan fitted the lion hood over his head. The sky purpled behind plumes of snow blown up from the ground. He looked at his feet, then up again, and set off into the whiteness toward the sinking sun. Oh my god, like the man's still walking. He finally finds safety in this job offered to him by the captain, and like he could make money and eventually make his way east like he wanted to, but he's like, "No, I'm going home. I'm done with this." And it doesn't matter how much time has passed or what's happened, he's just going home. And the really sad thing to think about is surely his parents are gone by now, and his brother probably won't be there. There's really nothing you can imagine waiting for him in Sweden. But it's just that urge to be like, I'm tired, I'm ready to rest now, I'm going to go back to where I came from, even though most of his life he has spent in America. It's like he said, it's just never been his home. So he's going to go back to where he spent the first few years of his life. And that description of another sky under the sky, I think that's great. That is reflected in the cover, where it's like, you know what I'm saying? Mirrored. Anyway, this was lyrical, it was brilliant, it was truthful, it felt like just, I'm looking throughout my whole life for books that feel like a true description of the human experience, and it's like, it's right here. It's right here. Even if we have not all been through anything like what he's been through, this person in under, let's see, in just about 250 pages, a nice, I think, perfect length for literary fiction, has managed to just boil down the experience of aging and loneliness and grief, and just put it all in this package that is just 100% honest and accurate, and oh my god, I wish I could read it again for the first time. And I'm definitely going to read, I got another of his books called Trust now. I mean, I don't even think I'd made it halfway through the book before I was like, yo, I'm going to buy his other book. So, tell me if you've read this. And I don't know if anybody watches the entire video, like if they haven't read the book, but I think sometimes people do. Because they're like, no, I'm not going to read it, but I want to hear what it's about. But just tell me your thoughts. Oh, and there's an alarm. Okay, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time pretty soon, because I've gotten so backed up with all the videos that I was going to film, and now I've planned all of them, and I gotta rapid fire film them all. So, see you soon. Until then, happy reading.